Hey everyone, Dylan here, back with another video, and in today's video I'm going to go over all the Final Fantasy games I have played. Now, I really enjoy the Final Fantasy games and enjoy the games series. Again, when I did have sight, I played most of them. There's a couple that I didn't play, but we'll get to them. So we'll start with numero uno. And this is in no particular order, like this isn't the order that I actually played them, but so we're just going to start with Final Fantasy I. So after I had played a bunch of Final Fantasies at this point, I decided to go back and try the first one, and I basically did this on my phone. I downloaded Final Fantasy 1, 2, 3, and 4 like ROMs to play on my phone with an emulator, and I played the first one for an hour, and I actually liked what I played of it because I played an hour, and if I hated it I would have dropped it, which you'll see with another one. And so I like, from what I remember, it's just a pretty simple old-time RPG being from the first Final Fantasy, and I liked it. I liked what I played of it for an hour. I don't know why I didn't go back to it, but I mean, yeah, so that was the first one. The second one, Final Fantasy II, I played for 20 minutes. I didn't end up liking Final Fantasy II. I liked how it started and the characters, how it started a bit, but I did not like the leveling up system in it, and the way that it did it, and many different things about the game, and I did the first 20 minutes, I was just like, nope, I noped out. Final Fantasy III, I did not get to play it. The ROM I had downloaded would not work, and I looked for others. So Final Fantasy III, I never played it, never got a chance to try it. Although I have a feeling I wasn't really missing out from, what I'm thinking here. And then we go to Final Fantasy IV. I believe I at least put an hour into Final Fantasy IV. I might have played a little bit more. I don't remember exactly, but I liked what I played of 4. The music was good. Starting out as a dark character in the beginning. What was his name? Cecil? That might be wrong, but it's been a while. Give me some credit. I don't really remember his name, but the main character starting out was cool, and I played, like I said, an hour, if not more, and from what I remember, I really enjoyed Final Fantasy IV and its music. Final Fantasy V, I played the whole first world of Final Fantasy V, and there are a couple other worlds. I guess it's a little bit of a spoiler, but hey, and Final Fantasy V is just good. It's just a solid game. Like, there's a job system where you can just choose different jobs and swap them out, and you get different abilities depending on which one you go with. They can equip different weapons. You have, when you're grinding up ability points for those jobs, and gold and normal experience, and the characters are fun and great, and it's just a good, solid, like RPG game it's not crazy, but it was still very enjoyable for what I played of it. And I played several hours of it. So Final Fantasy V is really good. You should check it out. Final Fantasy VI, I played a bit of. I don't know how many hours I put into it, but I know I played a couple hours, and it was good and fine for what I played, but what made me end up stopping, and this is a spoiler, I guess, but when one of the characters, you got to the ghost train, and he suplexes the ghost train. Now, there's only so much fantasy and fiction I can handle right at one time, to where everything was pretty good and made sense, but I don't know, it just, when that person suplexes a ghost train, it just like made me stop playing. I was like, it just bothered me that much to where it like ruined me. Like, I was just like, I'm good, I'm done. So it bothered me that much, And I kind of wish I would have went back to it and gotten over it, because it was kind of a petty reason. It's stupid to drop the game, but it just was so jarring. So I just kind of like, eh. But I did like what I played for the most part of Final Fantasy VI, and the music is pretty good. Final Fantasy VII. Final Fantasy VII I played until the train graveyard. I went through some of the train graveyard and died and just never picked the game up again. So I played like an hour or two of it, wherever that kind of puts you in the game. And I enjoyed a good bit of what it was until I had played like Final Fantasy V and VI. I kind of really was like, because people really overhyped Final Fantasy VII for me, and so when I actually played it, I was like, like it was. I was underwhelmed a bit from what I played a little bit, but having played I went back and played Final Fantasy V and VI, and then went back to 7, and then I understood. I was like, going from like 5 and 6 to 7 is a big jump back then. So even though I wasn't there, I wasn't playing the games at the time, actually playing 6 and then seeing 7, I was like, okay, I get it. I can appreciate the jump now. So I can understand it to a good point. And I liked what I played. The music was cool. Just the style of the game was cool, even though it's a rough around the edges on how it looked. But the characters were cool for as much as I played. So Final Fantasy VII was good. Then we get to Final Fantasy VIII. In Final Fantasy VIII, I played up to, I think when they get the first main characters pass out, and then you go to see these 3 other characters that you've never seen. I think one of the characters' name is Laguna. It was really weird, and I didn't really like it. That's about as far as I played, and man, I wish Final Fantasy VIII was so much more than what it was. It was a school, and you started in an academy. I think a military academy, maybe? It's hard to remember. But Squall's design was cool, the graphics were cool, the music was cool, but Squall himself was dumb. And I don't know, most of the characters I didn't really care about or like. I didn't like them. It was just weird. So I didn't really, I don't know. Final Fantasy VIII failed on everything, really. And it had so much potential, so that's kind of how I feel about that. Final Fantasy IX, I played the first disc of Final Fantasy IX. I really liked Final Fantasy IX. I actually loved it a lot. I don't know why I didn't continue playing it. I just didn't. You just kind of stopped playing the game, maybe for no particular reason. And that's kind of what happened with me with Final Fantasy IX. I played the first disc. I loved the music, I loved the style of the game, just how it felt medieval. I love the characters. Final Fantasy IX is great. You should give it a try if you have not played Final Fantasy IX. Definitely give it a try. Then Final Fantasy X. Final Fantasy X is my favorite Final Fantasy. It is also my favorite game of all time. I've beaten it several times. With many times. I own it on 3 different consoles. Yeah, that's Final Fantasy X. Then we go to Final Fantasy X2. And I don't like Final Fantasy X2, but not because I think it's a horrible game or anything, but because they push it as a sequel, right? But it's not really a sequel to Final Fantasy X in the way you would think it would be. So they're very completely different, and it just is so jarring going from 10 to 10-2. And I think that's why a lot of people hate it. I think if it was like a spin-off or something, or a game of its own that didn't have the 10-2 title with it, I think people would have been willing to give it more of a chance. I played a bit of it, and they're spear hunters, Yuna, Riku, and another girl character, and the game is fun for what it is, and I liked it. There's some things I didn't really like about it in certain aspects, but it's not a bad game. It's just the way it was presented with the name, like it was a sequel to Final Fantasy X, so it was really weird. So that's kind of why I have an issue with it. But as far as like the game itself, it's fine. Then we have Final Fantasy XI, which I never got to play. It was like an online game, I believe, and I just never played it. Never had an opportunity to play it, actually. So that's Final Fantasy XI. Final Fantasy XII, I love Final Fantasy XII. I pretty much played to the very, very end of Final Fantasy XII. Like, I played to the point where it asks you, do you want to go to the final area? There's no turning back at this point, and all that. So I pretty much played all of it. And I didn't finish it because I kept dying getting to the like final bosses of the game for some weird reason. So I was just like, I didn't care about it. I didn't care about the story of Final Fantasy XII, so it didn't really matter to me. So I just watched the ending in a YouTube video. So I've seen the whole game. I've seen the ending in a YouTube video, but I've played everything else of it. Really love Final Fantasy XII. The world, the music, the gameplay is just amazing. The characters, not so much, but yeah. So it's Final Fantasy XII. Final Fantasy XIII is garbage. Hate it. The best thing about Final Fantasy XIII, I played it, by the way, is the music and the visuals. It was a pretty game at the time, and the music was really good. That's it. The characters suck. The story is blah, and like everything like feels like a boxed in hallway, and you don't even have stores. The stores is on this little save computer thing that floats in the air. You save at it and you can buy weapons and stuff. They don't even have proper shops, and it's just really weird. And so I really dislike Final Fantasy XIII. I played to the final area of Final Fantasy XIII, and I quit because I couldn't get past the enemies. The level difficulty just got so hard so suddenly that there's nothing I could do. And I had previously, there's a monster that you can grind for tons of experience and items. You can kind of cheese it a bit. It was like this giant turtle dinosaur monster, I think. And I fought him so many times and leveled up and grinded so much before I even went to this final area. And after doing that for hours and hours and then going to the final area and then them just slapping me down, I tried different strategies. It just, the difficulty spike was insane. And between me just not enjoying the game, honestly, and then that, I'm just like, I'm done. I don't care about finishing this game. It was bull crap. So that's how I felt about Final Fantasy XIII. It was pretty and the music was good, but that's it. No other value. Then Final Fantasy XIV. I didn't play 13-2 or Lightning Returns or whatever, and I didn't play Final Fantasy XIV as either. I always thought Final Fantasy XIV was just an online game only, and I think it has an actual story, right? And because I was like, I don't want to play with other people, I just want to play a solo story. So I think I was confused. I think I found out that it did have a story, and so if I could have played it on my own without playing the online elements, I would have really loved Final Fantasy XIV had I known. But it was just kind of confusing. And I thought it was an online only game to where you had to play with others and stuff, and that's not what I wanted. But looking at what it was, I would have really enjoyed it. So it kind of sucks that I never got to play it or give it a try, because I didn't really know what it really was. So that's kind of that. Final Fantasy 15. I think I played the demo of Final Fantasy 15. I have a problem with Final Fantasy 15 because that was the last Final Fantasy game I saw when I had sight as it was coming out. It had a car in it, and they made Final Fantasy modern, and I really didn't like that. It was just like, if it wasn't under the Final Fantasy name, if it was just under a different name title, I would have been like, fine, it's great, enjoy it, fine. But as a Final Fantasy title, I did not like it and how it looked and how it presented things. So I just messed around with the demo and I didn't even bother playing it. So That's my experience. And yeah, that's pretty much my experience with all the Final Fantasy games that I have played. So let me know in the comments below what your favorite Final Fantasy game is, what your experiences were if you played them. And yeah, that's gonna be it for me. Thank you guys for watching and thank you guys for listening. I will see you in the next video.